There is a gold coin sitting in a museum display case somewhere in Europe right now, behind thick glass, under careful lighting, labeled as a Roman artifact. But the truth, the full, unfiltered, documented truth, is that the civilization that first perfected that coin design was African. The empire that minted gold at a scale that made the ancient world take notice was not in Rome, not in Greece, not in Persia. It rose from the highlands of northeastern Africa, in a kingdom so powerful, so sophisticated, so globally connected that Rome didn't just trade with it, Rome studied it, imitated it, and then spent centuries pretending it had done neither. For the African diaspora today, this is not simply ancient history. This is the answer to a question that has been weaponized against Black people for generations, the question of whether Africa ever produced anything lasting, anything worthy, anything that changed the world. The Aksumite Empire answers that question in gold. And understanding what the empire built, what was stolen from its story, and what stubbornly survived despite centuries of erasure, is one of the most powerful acts of reclamation any descendant of Africa can undertake right now. This is not mythology. This is not Afrocentric fantasy. This is documented, excavated, catalogued history that the mainstream world has simply chosen not to teach loudly enough. Today, we change that. To understand what Aksum meant to the ancient world, you have to first understand where it sat on the map of human civilization. The Aksumite Empire emerged as a dominant power around the 1st century of the Common Era in what is now northern Ethiopia and Eritrea, with its capital city of Aksum positioned at a geographical crossroads that made it one of the most strategically valuable locations on Earth. To the east lay the Red Sea port of Adulis, one of the busiest commercial harbors in the ancient world. To the north stretched Egypt and access to the Mediterranean. To the south and west spread the fertile highlands of sub-Saharan Africa. Aksum sat at the center of all of it. The Persian prophet Mani, writing in the 3rd century, listed Aksum as one of the 4 greatest empires in the world, alongside Rome, Persia, and China. That is not a minor footnote. That is a contemporary observer, writing in real time, placing an African kingdom in the same tier of global power as the most famous civilizations in human memory. The empire's reach extended across the Red Sea into the Arabian Peninsula, into parts of modern-day Yemen and Sudan. Aksumite merchants traded in ivory, gold, frankincense, and exotic animals with civilizations stretching from India to the Mediterranean. They built massive stone obelisks, stelae, some reaching 30 meters in height, carved from single pieces of granite in a display of engineering mastery that still astonishes modern architects and archaeologists. Under kings like Ezona, who ruled in the 4th century and became one of the first monarchs in world history to officially adopt Christianity, Aksum was not a peripheral civilization quietly existing at the edges of the world. It was the world. It was one of its beating hearts. Now we come to the coins. Because the coins are where the story becomes both extraordinary and infuriating in equal measure. Beginning around the 3rd century, the Aksumite Empire began minting its own currency in gold, silver, and bronze. This was itself a remarkable achievement. Only a handful of states in the ancient world had the institutional sophistication and the material wealth to produce a standardized coinage system. But Aksum did not just mint coins. It innovated in ways that would echo for centuries. Aksumite gold coins featured something almost entirely unprecedented in the ancient world at that time: gilded imagery, inscriptions in multiple languages including Goizi and Greek, and most critically, the faces of their kings. The visual language of Aksumite coinage, the composition, the use of the royal portrait, the symbolic framing of divine authority through the image of the sovereign, all of it was studied and replicated by Byzantine and Roman minters. For 400 years, the design principles that Aksum pioneered in its coinage influenced the visual grammar of Roman and Byzantine currency. Numismatists, scholars who study coins, have documented these design parallels in peer-reviewed research. The influence is not speculative. It is measurable, traceable, and recorded. And yet when the history of ancient coinage is taught in schools, when the lineage of Western monetary systems is traced, Aksum is almost never mentioned. The story jumps from Greek status to Roman denarii to Byzantine solidi, as if the African empire that was simultaneously developing and in some cases leading that conversation simply did not exist. That omission is not accidental. It is the fingerprint of a centuries-long project to remove Africa from its rightful place in the story of human achievement. The erasure of Aksumite history did not happen in a single moment. It accumulated across centuries through a series of deliberate and structural acts of suppression. The colonial period was perhaps the most aggressive phase of this erasure. When European powers carved up Africa in the 19th century, one of the most powerful tools they used to justify conquest was the narrative that Africa had no history worth preserving, no architecture, no literature, no statecraft, no science. This narrative required constant maintenance, because the evidence kept contradicting it. In Ethiopia specifically, European scholars and colonial administrators encountered a civilization with ancient written languages, with centuries of royal chronicles, with monumental stone architecture, and with a continuous Christian tradition older than most of Europe's. Their response was not to revise the narrative. Their response was to minimize, to misattribute, and in some cases to physically remove the evidence. The most brazen example is the obelisk of Aksum, a 30-meter stele that Italian fascist forces, under orders from Benito Mussolini, physically removed from Ethiopian soil in 1937 after the Italian invasion and erected in Rome. It stood in Rome for 68 years. Italy only returned it in 2005, after decades of Ethiopian diplomatic pressure and international advocacy. That obelisk, cut from Ethiopian granite, erected by Ethiopian hands, celebrating Ethiopian royal power, spent nearly 7 decades in a European capital as a trophy. That is not metaphorical erasure. That is literal, physical theft of African history relocated to European soil. Beyond the obelisk, the academic suppression was equally systematic. For generations, Western Egyptology and classical studies framed their disciplines in ways that treated sub-Saharan and East African civilizations as separate from, and implicitly lesser than, the Mediterranean world. Textbooks trace the lineage of Western civilization through Athens and Rome without pausing to acknowledge that Athens and Rome existed in a world where African kingdoms were their peers. The work of African scholars who pushed back against this framework, scholars like Cheikh Anta Diop and later David Philipson, whose archaeological work on Aksum was groundbreaking, was frequently marginalized or dismissed by mainstream Western academic institutions. The message sent, again and again, was clear: Africa's story is not the world's story. That message was a lie, and the evidence of Aksum proves it. What could not be erased, however, is staggering in its scope and beauty. The Guizi language, the ancient liturgical language of the Aksumite Empire, is still spoken today. It is the liturgical language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church and the Eritrean Orthodox Tewahedo Church, making it one of the oldest continuously used liturgical languages on the planet. When worshippers in Addis Ababa or Asmara or in Ethiopian Orthodox diaspora churches in Washington, D.C., London, or Melbourne chant the ancient hymns, they are speaking words that were written when Rome was still a global superpower. That is an unbroken chain of living language stretching back nearly 2,000 years. The stele of Aksum still stand. Several of the ancient obelisks remain in the city of Aksum in modern Ethiopia,